The morning at Ridgeview Middle started in the same quiet, predictable way it always did. Students slowly filled the halls, some half awake, some chatting in small groups, and others dragging their feet as if each step brought them closer to a day they were already tired of. Most kids didn't pay much attention to who stood where or how people walked. But every single student who had been at the school longer than a week knew exactly when the real start of the day happened. It happened when Landon entered. He wasn't the tallest kid in school. He wasn't the loudest, and he didn't cause trouble just to make a scene. But he had a presence that made people move aside without him needing to say a single word. His face never showed much emotion, and his eyes always seemed like they were looking past people rather than at them. That was enough to make students feel like they should step aside. Landon didn't go out of his way to make people feel uncomfortable. He didn't shove, didn't yell, didn't make threats. But he walked with a confidence that made it clear he wasn't someone you wanted to argue with. It was the kind of confidence that came from surviving things people his age shouldn't have to deal with every day. He walked the same path straight through the center of the hallway, past the lockers, past the bulletin board with its fading posters, past the teachers who gave him polite but cautious smiles. Students would part on both sides. Like water moving around a rock in a stream, today should have been the same, but something small, so small that at first, no one really understood why it mattered, shifted the rhythm of the morning. A new girl stood in the hallway. Her name was Lena. She held her backpack with both hands, not tightly, but in a relaxed way. She wasn't nervous the way new students usually were. She looked around with calm curiosity, taking in the walls, the classrooms, the flow of students. Her eyes didn't dart nervously. They moved slowly, as if she had time to understand everything. The office had given her a small map of the school. She studied it with the same careful attention someone might use when reading a letter. She wasn't lost, but she wasn't in a hurry either. She didn't know about Landon. She didn't know about the unspoken rule. She didn't know that she was standing in the exact space everyone. Avoided students noticed immediately. Some stepped aside. Some whispered. A few stared behind her, waiting for what they believed would be a tense moment. Landon approached with his usual quiet steps. His expression didn't change as he walked. But when he saw someone standing in his path, he slowed down, not because he was angry, but because he was confused. No one ever stood there. Lena didn't react at first. She was still reading the map. The hallway sounds faded behind her as she tried to orient herself. Landon expected her to look up, see him, and step aside quickly. But when she finally did glance up, her reaction was nothing he expected. "Oh," she said simply, taking one easy step to the side. "Sorry." Her tone was soft, polite, and not even a little afraid. Landon walked past her without a word. But something didn't sit right with him. He wasn't used to anyone speaking to him like that. Not scared. Not intimidated, just normal. It was such a small moment, yet it lingered in his mind. The rest of the morning moved as usual. Students went to class, teachers handed out worksheets, and the air carried the quiet buzz of ordinary school life. But the whispering about Lena had already begun. She stood in front of him like it was nothing. Does she not know who he is? What if he gets annoyed? Kids didn't spread these whispers out of cruelty. They spoke them out of habit because in their minds, Landon was someone to keep distance from. Lena didn't understand the strange attention she was getting. People stared at her, watched her walk, observed her reactions. At first, she wondered if her shirt had gotten dirty or if she had something stuck to her backpack. But no one seemed to be looking at her clothes. They were studying her. She shrugged it off. She had been the new kid many times before. New schools always came with whispers. What she didn't know was that this time, whispering wasn't about her past or her appearance or her quiet personality. It was because she stepped into a space the entire school quietly avoided by her second class. Lena had already noticed something else. Landon kept appearing in places she didn't expect. Not following her, but crossing paths often. Whenever they passed each other, she greeted him with a simple nod or a soft hi. The way she would greet anyone, it threw him off every time. No one greeted Landon unless they had to. But Lena did, not out of boldness, but out of natural politeness. During lunch, she sat alone at a small table by the window. She didn't mind eating alone. It actually gave her time to think. She opened her lunch container and ate quietly while looking outside at the courtyard. A few kids watched her from their table. She's different. Maybe she's brave. Or maybe she doesn't know how things work here. Landon sat at his usual table with the same group of boys who always surrounded him, but he wasn't paying attention to their jokes. His eyes drifted across the cafeteria again. He saw Lena sitting alone. She didn't seem sad or lonely. She wasn't pretending to read or pretending to be busy. She ate slowly, as if she enjoyed the quiet moment. Why didn't she seem affected by being alone? Why didn't she seem bothered by people whispering about her? Why didn't she look nervous the way new students normally did? Landon didn't have answers. He never had to think about someone else's reactions this much. Later that afternoon, during a short break between classes, Lena walked down a quieter hallway near the library. She carried 2 library books in her hands. The pages were slightly worn, which made her smile. She liked old books. They felt lived in. She stopped near the return slot to slide the books inside. Then she heard footsteps behind her. It was Landon. She didn't flinch. She didn't freeze. She simply turned, gave a small nod, and said, "Hi again." Her tone stayed the same, soft, friendly, normal. Landon opened his mouth to say something, but he didn't know what. He wasn't used to talking to new students. He wasn't used to talking to anyone unless he needed to. "You settling in?" he asked, pretending he didn't care about the answer. "Yes," Lena said. "I like it here so far." Landon blinked. "Really?" "Most new kids think it's stressful. It's quieter than some places I've lived," she replied. "People here are interesting." "Interesting how?" he asked. "They pay attention," she said with a small smile. "A lot of attention." She didn't stay longer than necessary. She placed the books into the return slot and walked away. Landon stood there, looking at the empty space where she had just been. For a moment, he felt something unfamiliar, curiosity mixed with confusion. Why didn't she treat him like the others did? Why didn't she move in fear? Why did she seem so calm around him? That small encounter left him feeling unsettled in a way he couldn't explain. As the week went on, Lena continued moving through the school with quiet confidence. She wasn't loud. She didn't try to impress anyone. But she noticed things. She noticed people dropping their books and helped pick them up. She noticed a boy eating alone and smiled at him as she walked by. She noticed a girl struggling to open a locker and offered to help. Those small gestures didn't go. Unseen kids began seeing her as someone gentle but strong in her own quiet way. She didn't fight for attention. Attention naturally found her. Landon noticed everything too. He didn't want to, but he did. Whenever she entered a hallway, the atmosphere felt slightly different. Not loud or dramatic, just quietly changed. Like someone had opened a window in a room that always felt stuffy. One afternoon, when students were getting ready to leave for the day, Landon heard a group of boys whispering loudly near the school entrance. "She doesn't get the rules here. She just walks around like nothing can bother her. She's going to get on Landon's bad side soon." Lena sat on a bench nearby, reading her book while waiting for her ride. She heard their whispers, but she didn't react. She kept reading quietly. Landon glanced at the boys, then at Lena. Something inside him tightened. Not angered, something closer to discomfort. He didn't like people using his name to intimidate others. He didn't want to be the reason someone felt unsafe. But he didn't know how to fix that. He didn't approach her. He didn't speak up. He wasn't ready for that. But he walked away with a thought he couldn't shake. Maybe being the toughest kid wasn't the same as being the strongest. Maybe strength looked different than he'd always believed. And maybe Lena, with her calm eyes and quiet steps, was going to teach him something he never expected. This was only the beginning of a story neither of them saw coming. The days following the incident at school felt strangely quiet for her. It was the kind of quiet that didn't come from peace, but from everyone watching her differently, as if they were waiting to see what she would do next. She didn't like that kind of attention. She preferred to stay in the background, to move through the day without people staring or whispering. But ever since she stood up for herself in front of everyone, classmates who hardly noticed her before were now treating her like she had suddenly become someone important. Some were impressed, some confused, some even a bit uneasy. As though they didn't know how to behave around her, she tried not to think about it too much. She told herself that things would return to normal soon. She would go back to being the quiet girl who kept to herself. And the moment everyone was talking about would fade from their minds. But each day made that harder to believe. People didn't just forget something that surprised them. And what happened didn't just surprise them, it shook them. The one person she expected to see again. The one person she braced herself for was the bully who had acted like he owned the entire school. She expected him to be angry, embarrassed, or ready to retaliate. But for some strange reason, he didn't appear in the halls at all. No loud footsteps. No shouting at other students. No pushing kids out of his way. Nothing. It wasn't like him to go quiet. The school felt almost unusual without his presence looming over everyone. She noticed the difference most during lunch. The cafeteria was always noisy, full of chatter and movement, but usually there was a certain edge in the air whenever he was around. People sat differently, spoke differently, always watching out for him. Without him there, the room felt softer, almost relaxed. Even the teachers seemed less tense. Still, the quiet made her uneasy, because she knew silence could hide things just as much as noise could reveal them. One afternoon, on her way to class, she overheard two students talking near their lockers. They weren't whispering, but their tone suggested they were discussing something they didn't fully understand. "Did you hear what happened to him?" One asked. "I heard he hasn't been back since that day," the other replied. "Some people said he's in trouble. Others said he's suspended. No one really knows. He just disappeared." She felt her stomach twist. Disappeared? That didn't sound right. He was many things: loud, reckless, intimidating, but he never struck her as the type to simply vanish. He thrived on being seen. He wanted attention, even the negative kind. She didn't want to feel guilty, but part of her did. She hadn't meant to embarrass him or make him look weak. She had only tried to defend herself, tried to remind him that he couldn't keep treating people however he wanted. She never thought the outcome would echo through the school the way it did. She never thought it would change anything for him, or for her. Later that week, a teacher approached her after class. It wasn't her usual teacher, but someone who worked closely with students who struggled with behavior or academics. The teacher's expression was gentle, calm, but serious enough to make her feel uneasy. "Do you have a moment to talk?" the teacher asked softly. She nodded, though part of her worried she was in trouble. They walked to a quieter corner outside the classroom, away from the chatter of students packing up. "I just wanted to check on you," the teacher said. "A lot has happened recently, and I know it can feel overwhelming when everyone's talking about you or watching you differently." She looked down at her hands and admitted, "It feels strange. I didn't want any of this to happen." "I understand," the teacher replied, "but you should know something. What you did that day. It wasn't wrong. You stood up for yourself, and you did it without hurting anyone. That takes courage." Her eyes lifted slightly, surprised. "But everyone keeps saying things." "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause trouble," the teacher assured her. "Sometimes a moment shows people something they weren't expecting, and change can make people uncomfortable, even if it's a good change." She nodded slowly, taking in the words. But her heart felt heavier instead of lighter, as if sensing her concern. The teacher added quietly, and about him, "You're not responsible for what's happening now." She paused. "So something did happen?" The teacher didn't answer right away. "He's going through something personal. The school is handling it. He's not in danger, but he's dealing with consequences that were overdue. And sometimes, when someone's been acting out for a long time, it takes just one moment for everything to catch up to them." She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't sure if she felt relief or more worry. The bully had made school difficult for so many people, not just her. Maybe it wasn't surprising that something finally made him stop. but she never expected it to happen because of her. That night at home, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her room was quiet, and the only sound was the soft hum of a fan on her desk. She tried to replay everything that had happened, searching for the moment where things shifted. It felt strange that something she didn't plan at all could change the entire atmosphere at school. She wasn't used to having that kind of impact. She wasn't used to people noticing her, let alone talking about her. She wondered if her parents would understand what she was feeling. They always encouraged her to be brave, to speak up if someone mistreated her, but they didn't know the details of what happened. She hadn't told them. She didn't want them to worry or to think she was involved in conflict. She valued peace at home, especially since things could get stressful sometimes with schedules, work, and daily life. She didn't want to add to that. Still, part of her wished she could talk to someone freely about how confused she felt. She wasn't proud or excited about the attention. She wasn't trying to become some kind of story that people retold. She only wanted things to be normal. The next day, the school felt even more different. Her classmates looked at her with a mix of curiosity and respect, something she'd never expected to experience. She overheard someone say she was brave. Another said she was inspiring. A few others said they wished they could stand up for themselves the way she did. She didn't feel brave or inspiring. She felt like someone who had been pushed to a point where she finally reacted. She didn't plan it, and she didn't feel like a hero. But hearing those things made her realize something. Maybe the moment wasn't just about her. Maybe other students finally felt like things could change. At lunchtime, something surprising happened. A student she barely knew approached her and asked if they could sit with her. Then another. Soon, she found herself not alone at the table for the first time in a long while. They didn't bring up the incident directly, but they spoke kindly, asked normal questions, laughed softly at simple things. It felt strange at first, having people around her, but gradually she relaxed. It felt nice. Even so, she wondered if things would stay this way, or if everything would shift again once the bully returned. She didn't fear him the way she once did. But the uncertainty lingered. After school, she walked home the same route she always took. The sky was a soft orange, the kind of color that made everything look warm even when the air was cool. Leaves rustled lightly along the sidewalk. She listened to the rhythm of her steps. She thought about how quickly life could change. One moment could shift everything. One small act could open a new path without warning. She wasn't sure where this path was leading, but she sensed that whatever came next, she wouldn't be the same person she was before it at home. Her younger sibling asked her if anything interesting happened at school. She smiled a little and said, "Not really." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. The day itself had been calm. It was everything around the day that felt heavy. She helped with dinner, washed dishes, and listened to her parents talk about work. Everything felt normal on the outside, but her mind kept drifting back to the boy who hadn't returned to school. She couldn't help wondering what exactly he was going through and whether he felt alone. Embarrassed or angry, she didn't hate him. She never had. She had always hoped he would simply stop hurting others. She never wished anything bad on him. As she got ready for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked the same as always. But something in her expression felt different, stronger, steadier, as if she were slowly discovering a version of herself she never knew existed. And deep down, she sensed this was only the beginning of a much bigger change. One that would affect not just her, but the entire school. What she didn't know was that the bully's silence was not the end of the story. It was only a pause before something unexpected would unfold, something that would push both of them into a situation neither had ever imagined. She woke up the next morning with a strange feeling in her chest. The kind that comes when you sense something is about to change, even though you don't know what it is yet. The sun was only just rising, casting a soft glow across her room. But instead of the peaceful start she hoped for, her mind immediately went to school. She wondered if anything would feel different today, or if people would still stare at her, like she had somehow become part of a story she'd never asked to be in. She got ready quietly, moving through the morning routine without saying much. Her family assumed she was just sleepy, but the truth was she couldn't shake the uneasiness inside. As she walked to school, her steps felt slower, heavier, like her body was trying to delay reaching whatever waited for her there. When she arrived, the halls were buzzing with the same usual noise lockers slamming. Kids laughing, teachers reminding students to hurry, but there was something else mixed in, a kind of excitement or tension she couldn't quite place. She caught a few students glancing at her, then whispering to their friends. She wasn't sure if it was still about the incident, or if something new had happened. She tried to ignore it and headed straight to her first class. As she took her seat, a classmate leaned over and whispered, "He's back." She blinked, unsure if she heard correctly. "Who?" she asked quietly. The classmate gave her a knowing look. "Him. He came to school this morning?" Her heart thudded once, hard. So the silence had finally ended. The bully had returned. She didn't know how she felt, worried, curious, maybe both. She wondered if he had changed. She wondered if he was angry. She wondered if their paths would cross again or if he would pretend she didn't exist. No matter what happened, she knew the day wouldn't be simple. As the class began, she tried hard to focus on the lesson, but her thoughts kept drifting. She imagined different scenarios, none of them comforting. She wondered if he would confront her again, or if he had been told by teachers to stay away. She wondered if the other students felt the same tension she did. The first class ended without anything unusual happening. But as she stepped into the hallway, the relief faded. The school felt different now that he was back, like the air had shifted. People were still talking about him, but the tone wasn't the same as before. It wasn't fear exactly, but something closer to curiosity mixed with uncertainty. When she reached her locker, she heard his voice not loud and demanding like before, but quieter, more controlled. Even so, she recognized it instantly. He was talking to a group of teachers near the main office. She couldn't hear the words clearly, but she could hear the tone. It was nothing like the tone he used to use. She froze for a moment, debating whether to walk past or wait until the group moved. But she didn't want to make it look like she was scared. She reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. So she took a deep breath and walked down the hall as naturally as she could. As she passed, she caught a glimpse of him. He didn't look the same. There was something different in his posture, in the way he stood, in the way his eyes stayed low instead of scanning the room like before. The teachers around him seemed calm, not tense the way they usually were when dealing with him. He didn't notice her at first. But then his eyes lifted slightly, and their gazes met for a split second. It wasn't a long look, but it was enough for her to see something she had never seen in him before hesitation. She quickly looked away and kept walking, her heart pounding. She didn't feel threatened, just thrown off. She wasn't expecting that kind of reaction from him. Her second class passed slowly as she struggled to shake off the awkwardness of that moment. She felt distracted, unable to settle into the rhythm of the day. The teachers taught as usual. Students whispered quietly, but everything felt like noise fading in and out, just before lunch. Her teacher made an announcement. "I need 2 students to help carry some boxes from the resource room," the teacher said. "Any volunteers?" Before she could think, her hand lifted halfway. She didn't really want to help, but sometimes volunteering was easier than being called on unexpectedly. Another student raised their hand too. "Great," the teacher said. "You too can head over now." The resource room was down the hall near the library. As she walked there with the other student, she tried to clear her mind. Carrying boxes was simple, uncomplicated. It was something she could do without having to talk to anyone new or deal with the strange. It's energy in the school. But when they reached the resource room, she stopped in her tracks. He was there. He was standing near a stack of boxes, talking quietly with a staff member. She hadn't expected to run into him so soon, especially not in a small room with no crowd around. For a brief moment, she considered turning back, but the staff member saw her and smiled. "Oh, good. You're here to help," the staff member said warmly. "We have a few boxes that need to be moved to the office." She stepped inside, keeping her eyes away from him as much as she could. The room felt too small, too quiet. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. "Here," the staff member said, handing her a box. "Just take this to the front office. You two," she nodded at her and the other student, "can grab the smaller ones first." She nodded and lifted the box carefully. But before she could leave, she heard his voice behind her. "Can help with that." His tone was soft, almost unsure. She froze again, unsure how to respond. The staff member looked surprised but pleased. "That would be great," the staff member said. "Thank you." He stepped closer, but not too close, and picked up another box. She could feel his presence beside her, but it wasn't like before. There was no pressure, no intimidation, just silence. As they walked toward the office, she kept her eyes straight ahead. The hallway was quiet, and she didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if he was going to apologize, or if he only offered to help because the staff member expected him to. She didn't want to assume anything. When they reached the office and set down the boxes, the other student excused themselves to use the restroom. Leaving her alone with him, he hesitated before speaking, as if searching for the right words. "I didn't mean for everything to get this bad," he said quietly. She didn't turn around right away. Instead, she let the words sit for a moment. They didn't sound like excuses. They sounded like someone who was finally being honest. After a moment, she faced him. His expression was different, less guarded, less proud, more human. "I'm not trying to make things worse," he added. "I know how I used to act. I know it wasn't right." She didn't know how to respond. She expected anger or defensiveness, not this. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying to fix things." She nodded slowly. "Okay." It was the only word she could manage. He seemed relieved. Even though her answer was simple, "I'm still figuring things out," he continued. "But I'm not going to bother you again, or anyone else." She believed him. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. They stood there in silence for a moment before the other student returned, and the quiet space between them disappeared. The rest of the day moved differently. She still felt uneasy, but not because she was scared. It was because the situation was so new, so unexpected. She didn't dislike him. She didn't trust him completely either, but she sensed he was trying. At lunch, she sat with the same group of students as before. They talked and laughed, but she found herself thinking about the moment in the hallway, about the way he had looked when he spoke. After school, as she walked home, she realized something important. The moment she stood up to him wasn't just a turning point for her, it might have been a turning point for him too. Maybe he needed someone to show him a boundary he couldn't ignore. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if he would truly change, or if things would get complicated again. But she did know this. Their story wasn't over. Something bigger was unfolding. Something neither of them could see clearly yet. And whatever came next, it would shape both of them in ways they never expected. The next morning felt strangely quiet, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The house that had been buzzing with tension the previous night now seemed almost peaceful. But the calm didn't comfort anyone. Everyone woke up early, even before the sun fully rose, because something in the air said things were far from over. The family gathered around the dining table, trying to talk like everything was normal, but every sound felt louder than usual. The clinking of spoons, the soft thud of cups being set down, even the whisper of the ceiling fan. No one wanted to say the wrong thing, so most words were short. Simple questions, simple answers. But inside, everyone was thinking about the same thing. What would happen next? After breakfast, he stepped outside for fresh air. The early morning breeze hit his face, cool and soft, but his mind wasn't calm at all. Every thought kept circling back to the night before. Everything that was said, everything that wasn't said. All the emotions everyone tried to hide. He walked down the small path behind the house where the ground was still wet from the night dew. The grass brushed against his shoes as he took slow steps, trying to piece together his next move. For a moment, he just stood there listening to the distant sounds of the neighborhood waking up doors opening. Children laughing on their way to school. A dog barking somewhere nearby. Life was going on as if nothing had happened, but he knew his own life had changed. After a few minutes of quiet, he turned back toward the house. The moment he stepped inside, he saw her sitting in the living room, looking like she had been waiting for him. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She just looked. Thoughtful, he sat across from her, leaving enough space to show respect, but close enough that she knew he wasn't avoiding her. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. She nodded slowly. "I am. But I've been thinking a lot." The way she said it made his heart race. He didn't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing. She continued, "Yesterday was overwhelming for all of us. And I don't want what happened to create a wall between us." He felt relieved, even though he didn't completely relax. "I don't want that either." She smiled a little. Not a big smile, just enough to show she believed him. "Then let's figure this out together." Those words hit him harder than anything else. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were genuine. For the first time since everything started, he felt like someone was on his side, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. They talked for a long time after that. Not arguing, not blaming, just talking. She told him how the whole situation made her feel confused, pressured, unsure of what everyone wanted. He listened carefully, really listened, because he knew this was the moment that could strengthen or break everything between them. Eventually, she said something that surprised him. "I think this is our chance to make things right. Not by proving anything to anyone, but by being honest with each other." He nodded. "I'm with you." Later in the afternoon, she suggested they visit the community center, not for anything serious, but just to spend time outside the house, around people, without tension. He agreed instantly. When they arrived, the atmosphere was completely different. Kids were playing, elders were chatting under the shade of trees, and a small group was painting a mural on the far wall. It felt peaceful, warm even. They walked side by side, not speaking much at first, but the silence felt comfortable now. Every few steps, she would glance at something and pointed out a child chasing a balloon, a group practicing dance moves, a man feeding birds. She seemed lighter here, as if the fresh air was helping her breathe again. At one point, a little girl ran past them laughing, her tiny shoes tapping against the pavement like raindrops. She looked up at them with the most innocent smile, and something about that moment lifted the heaviness that had been weighing on their shoulders. He looked at her and saw that she was smiling too. Genuinely this time. "You seem happier," he said. "I think I needed to step out," she replied. Sometimes being stuck in one place makes everything feel bigger than it is. They found a bench under a large tree and sat down. The shade covered them from the afternoon sun, and the leaves rustled softly above their heads. "Do you think things will get better?" he asked quietly. "I do," she said, without hesitation. "But only if we choose to make them better." Her answer gave him more comfort than he expected. It wasn't a promise of perfection. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was real, something that could actually be built. They stayed at the park for a long time, talking about normal things, laughing at little moments, letting themselves forget the stress, even if just for a short while. By the time they decided to leave, both of them felt lighter, as if the cloud over them had finally started to break apart. Back at the house, the atmosphere had changed a little too. The tension from the previous night wasn't gone, but it wasn't choking anymore. Everyone noticed the difference in their faces, the calm, the softness, the quiet confidence. "Everything okay?" someone asked gently. She nodded. "We're working on it." That simple sentence seemed to ease the room. As evening approached, they sat together outside near the small garden. The sky had turned shades of soft orange and warm pink, the kind of sunset that makes everything look like a painting. He looked at her and said, "Thank you for today." She gave him a small smile. "Thank you for trying." Neither of them said anything after that. They didn't need to. The silence was warm, comforting, and finally free from the weight of confusion. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't look scary. It looked possible. They didn't know exactly what the next days would bring, but they had taken the first step, and sometimes that's all it takes for a new beginning. And without realizing it, both of them felt something they hadn't felt in a while. Hope. The days after the final showdown felt strangely calm, almost like the school had taken a deep breath and finally let it out. People walked through the hallways with a different kind of energy now. There was no loud whispering, no nervous glancing over shoulders, no sudden tense silence whenever someone tough-looking walked by. It was as if the whole place understood that something important had changed, not just for the people involved, but for everyone who watched from the sidelines. After the moment behind the gym, the two who had once stood against each other carried themselves differently. The girl, who had once been quiet and alone, now moved through the day with a steady confidence that surprised anyone who happened to look her way. She did not talk much, and she did not have to. Her calm presence said enough. She no longer hugged her notebook close to her chest or kept her eyes fixed on the ground. Instead, she walked with her head up, eyes open, listening, observing, learning the new rhythm of her world. The boy, who had always believed he had to be the strongest, walked quietly for a while. People gave him space, but it was not the fearful space he was used to. It was something else, almost like everyone was watching to see what he would become now that the old version of him had fallen away. He did not raise his voice. He did not push through crowds. He did not slam lockers or show off when teachers walked by. Instead, he seemed to spend most of his time thinking. No one expected that from him. Maybe he didn't expect it from himself. One morning, the girl was sitting outside the entrance, writing something in her notebook. The sun was barely rising, painting the sky a soft orange. Her breath made a small cloud in the cool air. She enjoyed this time of day because it was quiet, and quiet made her feel grounded. A few minutes later, she heard slow footsteps approaching. She didn't look up at first. Lots of students arrived early. She assumed it was one of them. But then the footsteps stopped. She looked up. The boy stood a few feet away, holding the strap of his backpack with one hand. His shoulders were tense, unsure, like he had practiced walking here and still wasn't sure he should be standing in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The morning was still enough that she could hear the leaves rustle on the tree behind her. He cleared his throat a little. "Hey," he said, voice quiet. She nodded once. "Hey." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, searching for words that didn't come easily. I wanted to say something. Actually, a few things." He rubbed the back of his neck, something she had never seen him do. He had always seemed so sure of himself, but now his confidence felt different, less like a wall, more like a door being opened. She closed her notebook gently and gave him her full attention. "I'm sorry," he said. "About everything. Not just that day. I mean, all of it. All of the dumb stuff I did before. I know saying sorry doesn't fix it, but I needed to say it anyway." For a moment, the girl didn't respond. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wanted to choose her words carefully. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you for saying it. That means something." He nodded, relief softening his shoulders. "I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't even know why I acted the way I did. But I'm trying to figure it out." She believed him not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. There was no hiding behind bravado, no pretending. It was real. "People change," she said quietly. "It just takes a moment to start." He gave her a small smile. The kind that someone gives when they're grateful but still unsure if they deserve the forgiveness they're receiving. "I was wondering if you ever want to talk, or, I don't know, study or something. I'll be around." She smiled back, a tiny but warm one. "Maybe." Over the next few days, something interesting happened. The two of them didn't suddenly become best friends or sit together at lunch every day. They didn't talk constantly in the hallways or share jokes between classes. Instead, they built something slowly and understanding. A recognition that both had grown in their own ways. One afternoon, after school ended, the boy found himself sitting alone on the bleachers near the sports field. Practice had ended early, and the sky was turning the kind of soft gray that meant rain was coming later. He sat with his elbows propped on his knees, staring at the ground. The girl walked by, saw him, and hesitated. He looked troubled, not in the way he used to when he was angry, but in a thoughtful, quiet way. So she approached. "You okay?" she asked. He looked up, surprised but grateful. "Yeah, just thinking about stuff." She sat down a short distance from him, close enough to show she cared, but far enough to respect whatever he was working through. "Like what?" she asked. He sighed. "I used to think strength was about being feared. About making sure people didn't mess with me so I had control. But now I don't know. You showed me something different. She listened. The way you stood your ground, he continued. Not because you wanted to hurt anyone or prove anything. You just didn't let fear control you, and everyone saw it. I saw it. The girl looked ahead at the empty field, the grass swaying gently in the cool breeze. Strength isn't loud, she said. It doesn't have to be. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that now. There was another pause, but this one felt comfortable. Do you ever think about what people go through before they walk into school each day? She asked. All the time now, he replied. I used to think everyone had it easier than me, but maybe I just didn't want to see anything else. She appreciated his honesty. It was something she had started to rely on. As time went on, their interactions became more natural. Sometimes they talked in the hallways. Other times they exchanged a quick nod from across the room. Their classmates noticed, but no one said anything rude or judgmental. In fact, many were relieved. It felt like the school had regained a sense of peace it didn't know it had lost. One day, a younger student approached the girl during lunch. She seemed nervous, clutching the straps of her backpack tightly. I don't want to bother you, the younger student began. But I saw what happened before, the way you handled everything. It helped me. I was having a rough time, and seeing you stand up for yourself, it made me feel brave too. The girl smiled gently. I'm glad it helped. You don't have to face things alone. The younger student nodded and hurried off, comforted by the simple kindness. Meanwhile, the boy found his own moments to grow. He started helping his classmates more. He held doors open, picked up things others dropped, and even defended a quiet student when someone tried to tease him. People were skeptical at first, but over time, they began to believe the change was real. One afternoon, as the school year neared its end, the two found themselves walking out of the building at the same time. The sun was warm, casting long shadows across the pavement. Feels different now, doesn't it? He asked. She nodded. Yeah, in a good way. I'm glad we're not who we used to be, he said. She looked at him thoughtfully. People aren't stuck as one version of themselves. We grow, we learn. He smiled. Thanks for giving me a chance to be better. She shook her head. You gave yourself that chance. I just stood my ground. As they reached the corner where they usually parted ways, neither moved immediately. They stood there for a moment, letting the warm breeze brush past. So, he said softly, friends. She considered it not out of hesitation, but out of respect for the journey they had taken. Finally, she nodded. Yeah, friends, he grinned, a genuine grateful grin. See you tomorrow. See you, she replied. They walked their separate paths, both changed by the experience. Both understanding something deeper about strength, kindness, and the impact one moment can have on an entire life. The girl walked with a calm sense of purpose, knowing she no longer had to shrink herself to be safe. The boy walked with a quiet determination to keep becoming someone better than he had been, in the school, the place where everything unfolded, carried the memory of the day when the toughest bully met his match and discovered that real strength had nothing to do with power over others. It had everything to do with courage, compassion, and the willingness to grow. In the end, both of them became something no one expected, examples of change. Proof that a single moment of courage can shift an entire story. And their story continued, not with fear or anger, but with understanding, respect, and the quiet strength they both learned to carry.